Right, Hosea chapters 1 to 3 we're looking at actually this morning. For some people, Hosea is certainly an unknown book, and the thought that God himself can be known seems quite ridiculous to lots of people, because they think that God is some kind of stern headmaster. You know, you go into this headmaster's office with fear and trembling. Well, there's a sense sometimes that the God of the New Testament is a God of love, whereas the God of the Old Testament is this kind of fierce character, all about judgment and wrath. But Hosea paints God in a very different light, because remember, God is unchanging in every way. And when the New Testament says that God is love, that means he has always been love. Or he is love. And Hosea is going to help you know more about God's love so that you might experience that for yourself. But in doing that, the first place to start, strangely enough, is God's wrath. So verses 1 to 9 that we looked at, that we read earlier, feel God's wrath. We want you to feel why God has such wrath. Hosea is the first of the 12 minor prophets, as they're known. And from Hosea to Malachi is sometimes called the Book of the 12. It actually is sometimes seen, and particularly in the Hebrew Bible, it would be regarded as a single book, the Book of the 12. And the prophets, as you go through them, Hosea through to Malachi, they have some strong words of judgment and wrath as you go through. So these first 3 chapters are very foundational, actually, to all 12 books, all 12 minor prophets. If you see it as a set, this is the basis. And what we're seeing here is that God's wrath and his love are kind of 2 sides of the same coin, except that his love is his natural disposition towards you. God is love. And if there had never been any sin in the world, he would love infinitely. But his wrath is what you provoke him to, precisely because of his great love for you. And that's what we're going to see as we go through these first 3 chapters. So let me read the first verse again. With all these fabulous names. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, son of Beeri, during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and of Jeroboam, son of Jehoash, king of Israel. And lots of these prophets, most of the prophets actually start with details a bit like that. They say who the prophet was, when they were prophesying, when they were preaching. And it's important to know that they were speaking into a specific time, a specific moment in history, to real people, to real situations. Which does mean for you and me is that to get the most out of the prophets, you need to know a little bit of the Bible history. And actually, to understand the Bible history, you need theological perspective from the prophets. So the Old Testament does take a little bit more work than the New in those sort of ways. And certainly because he's talking about the word of the Lord that came to Hosea through the reigns through King Uzziah, King Jotham, King Ahaz, and Hezekiah, what you actually see is across the chapters of Hosea is chapters 1 to 3 are a unit, and then chapters 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, and so that there are kind of sections that we go through as we get through, as prophecies were given. So we'll look at it in these sort of sections as we go through. But anyway, he just jumped straight in, so that's what we'll do. So verse 2, when the Lord first spoke to Hosea, he said this to him: "Go and marry a woman of promiscuity and have children of promiscuity, for the land is committing blatant acts of promiscuity by abandoning the Lord." So God's told Hosea to go and find a wife, a woman of promiscuity, a woman known for sleeping around with many sexual partners, not part of any steady relationship with a man, but having lots of different sexual relationships with men. And what we're going to see is he has 3 children with this woman. So he finds the woman, he has 3 children with her, but Hosea himself is only the father of one of them. He's not the father of the other 2. Which means that Hosea and his wife and these 3 children are this broken, dysfunctional family with all these kind of broken relationships, full of betrayal and rejection and hurt. You imagine his wife going and saying, "Well, Hosea, guess what? I'm pregnant." He says, "Well, it's not mine, is it?" And all of those moments that have come through into this broken family. And you're given this picture because it's a reflection of God's heart for Israel. Because Israel is God's unfaithful bride. That's the point. And so something of the hurt that Hosea is going to feel and the dysfunctional nature of this family is a reflection of the hurt that God feels when his own people are unfaithful to him. That's what's going on in these chapters. Verses 3, 4, and 5. He went and married Gomer, this woman, the daughter of Diblaim. And she conceived and bore him a son. So at least the first child was Hosea's son. Then the Lord said to him, name him Jezreel, for in a little while I will bring the bloodshed of Jezreel on the house of Jehu, and put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. On that day, I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. Now, Jehu, this is one of those things where you need some of the history. Jehu had been a king in northern Israel. And when God used Jehu to bring judgment against Israel, Israel rebelled against God, and God sent Jehu actually to bring judgment against his people. But Jehu was overzealous, he was cruel, he was vicious, downright nasty, and just way over the top and brutal in what he did. And he caused a bloodbath of brutality at this city called Jezreel. You can read about that in 2 Kings 10 if you really want to. So for Hosea to name his child Jezreel, it's a grim, horrible thing to do. It's like choosing the name of a concentration camp or a scene of a really brutal war zone. You know, you're not going to do it. It's a gross thing. So what you've got is Hosea married to his unfaithful wife, and the produce of this unfaithful woman was this child Jezreel. And that's a picture of how the brutality of what happened at the town of Jezreel had come from the unfaithful bride that is Israel. Through her wickedness and her rebellion against God, her husband, had ended up with this brutality. So God's about to bring judgment back on Jehu's house. So that's this very child is a prophecy against that northern kingdom. So that's the first child. Verses 6 and 7, she conceived again. Doesn't say to Hosea. She conceived again and gave birth to a daughter. And the Lord said to him, name her Lo-Ruhamah, for I will not have compassion on the house of Israel. I will certainly take them away, but I will have compassion on the house of Judah. That's so northern Israel, southern Judah. And I will deliver them by the Lord their God. I will not deliver them by bow, sword, or war, or by horses and cavalry. Lo, it means no. That's the kind of negative. Lo-Ruhamah, compassion. And so no compassion is what that name means. A horrible name. And so the girl's not Hosea's. And every time Hosea looked at this girl, this child, he'd be reminded of his wife's promiscuity, her unfaithfulness, his love that had been rejected. He'd gone and married this woman, and she'd still just thrown that love back in his face. God is compassionate, but he chooses to act in compassion to some and not to act in compassion to others, even though his heart is full of compassion to everybody. And you're in one camp or you're in the other. He says, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy. I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. It's his choice. So then you have verses 8 and 9, the third child. After Gomer had weaned Lo-Ruhamah, she conceived and gave birth to a son. Then the Lord said, name him Lo-Ami, for you are not my people, and I will not be your God. So Lo again means no. Am is people, and the I on the end makes it my people. So not people mine, not my people. Again, the boy wasn't Hosea's. That's how it flows through as a picture. The unfaithfulness of Hosea's wife meant that the child wouldn't be loved as his own child by Hosea. The devastation and betrayal that Hosea would feel would be too great for him even to love this child of another man. And the unfaithfulness of one generation of Israel meant that the next generation would also not be the Lord's. As a parent goes away and walks away from the church, from God, from worship, so it's natural that the children will follow that example, that awful example. So here's the thing with this family, the relational pain that Hosea is feeling towards his wife, towards these children, it's a tiny image of what God himself feels at your unfaithfulness to him. And his judgment is chosen lack of compassion, his disownership, are all actually born out of his love for you. He's passionately loving towards you. That's who and what he is. And in your selfishness, self-centeredness, you've effectively jilted God. You've jilted him. And people will jilt God every day. And they'll turn to anything but him, turn to everything but him. And later chapters of Hosea explore all the things that you'll turn to rather than turning to God, the God who loves you. And if you can imagine for a moment Hosea's hurt and his anger, actually, at Gomer's betrayal. You know, I loved you, I married you, God told me to marry you, I thought things would work out, I thought everything would be fine and good and right, and you've gone off again. Twice. And these children are reminders of your unfaithfulness. So if you can imagine his love and his hurt and his anger, then you're catching a glimpse of God's hurt and love and anger towards you when you sin and rebel against him. That's what's going on in these chapters. How can a God of love be a God of wrath? Because he's a God of love. And his wrath is in proportion to his love. And if you can't see that, then you've not understood the depth of your betrayal against him. So here's the invitation. Enter God's love. So verses, we're going to make our way forward a little bit more beyond what we read earlier. So where Hosea goes next is actually a little bit unexpected. So let me read verse 10 and chapter 2, verse 1. Yet, so we've just read, name him Lo Am I, for you're not my people, I will not be your God. Yet, the number of the Israelites will be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or counted. And in the place where they were told, you are not my people, they will be called sons of the living God. And the Judeans and the Israelites will be gathered together. They will appoint for themselves a single ruler and go up from the land. For the day of Jezreel will be great. Call your brothers my people, and your sisters compassion. It's quite the turnaround, isn't it, from what we've literally just read. The words that we've just seen there partly come true in the Old Testament, partly come true in the return from exile in the days of Ezra and Nehemiah. We do see the kind of tribes starting to kind of come together somewhat. Again, they were partly true in the New Testament as well. But of the Jewish people. But 1 Peter 2 says, no, actually this stuff is about you as Christians. It's about the church. That's a prophecy about call your brothers my people and your sisters compassion. That's going to come true in the future. So 1 Peter 2 says this to you as the church. And he's writing it, 1 Peter 2 is generally to the church, not to even a specific place. You're a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his possession, so that you may proclaim the praises of the one who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. You had not received mercy, now you have received mercy. And in fact, the promise that the number of Israelites would be like the sand of the sea, that can't be measured or counted, that's got its roots in Genesis 22, Genesis 32. And God had promised Abraham that that Abraham would be a blessing to the whole world. And God's grace wasn't to be blown off course or thwarted by Israel's unfaithfulness. So he promised that in Genesis 22. We read it in 1 Peter 2 that absolutely this stuff has come true, despite the unfaithfulness of God's people. And the good news of grace and blessing would reach all people, all across the world, even Bromborough. And it's to bring people from darkness to light. You go through chapter 2 and verses 2 to 13, we're not going to read. They go into some detail about how God's bride, this unfaithful bride, how she's gone after other lovers, other gods, other nations, and she goes chasing after all sorts of other things rather than turning to the true God, her husband. And it proves disastrous for her. And when you go your own way, things often seem fun for a while. Graham was mentioning how we're like sheep that go astray, frivolous, frolicking in the fields. We're all having a whale of a time. We go after other lovers, other gods, other nations. And it ends up, the consequences of your sin just come back on your own head. And if that's what sin does, and God has this plan to bring salvation and blessing, how does anybody enter into that love? How do you enter into God's love? Well, he calls you to himself. So verse 14. These are beautiful verses, 14 to 17. Therefore I am going to persuade her. The I there is emphatic. I am going to persuade her, lead her to the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. There I will give her vineyards back to her and make the valley of Achor into a gateway of hope. There she will respond as she did in the days of her youth, as in the day she came out of the land of Egypt. In that day, this is the Lord's declaration, you will call me my husband, and no longer call me my Baal. For I'll remove the names of the Baals from her mouth, and they'll no longer be remembered by their names. So, in the verses we didn't read, verses 2 to 13, Hosea counted all the problems that had come to the unfaithful Israel because she'd been seduced by lovers of gods and nations. And in the face of that, God says, I am going to persuade her. I am going to woo her. The valley of Achor there that he mentions, that's where Achan sinned by taking some of the items from Jericho, the things he shouldn't have taken from Jericho. That's right at the start of Israel's entry into the promised land. So if the valley of Achor is the gateway to hope, what does that mean? It means go back to the beginning. Go back when you first entered the land. Go back to the start. Go back to your first love. God is kind of calling his bride back to the honeymoon. Let's go back to those honeymoon days. Back to the start. Remember when we loved each other and we enjoyed one another so much? Let's do that again. God says, you'll call me my husband and no longer call me my Baal, in verse 16. Baal can mean husband or it can mean master. And no woman wants to be married to a master. That's a dreadful thing, isn't it? The Bible does call on wives to submit to their husband as a loving helper, but not an obedient servant. And husbands are to love their wives sacrificially, with God himself as the perfect example, as Christ gave his life for his bride, the church. That's the love that God is calling his people to. It's that intimate, beautiful love between husband and wife. Let's go back to those honeymoon days. Your sin is deeply offensive to God because it's a rejection of his love. It's a rejection of his goodness, his compassion, his faithfulness towards you. And when you jilt him in favor of worldly trinkets, well, you're going to provoke his love to anger. And yet, for all his rightful, justifiable anger and wrath, look what he's doing. In these verses, he's calling you back. God calls you to repentance, to turn away from your sin, let's go back to the start. Go to him. He invites you with great tenderness, not as an overbearing master, come to the headmaster's office. He comes as a husband to his bride and says, let's go back to our honeymoon days. In Jesus' words, come to me, all who are weak and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest for your souls. The tender love is open from God, for you to enter into. You can enter into God's love for you, and he invites you to do that. He calls you to do that. And look what then he's inviting you to, verse 18 to 20. On that day, I'll make a covenant for them with the wild animals, with the birds of the sky, the creatures that crawl on the ground. I will shatter the bow, sword, and weapons of war in the land, and will enable the people to rest securely. I will take you to be my wife forever. I will take you to be my wife in righteousness, justice, love, and compassion. I will take you to be my wife in faithfulness, and you will know the Lord. That's stunning. I'll take you to be my wife forever. We've seen it in John chapter 6. What did he say? Jesus said, whoever comes to me, I will never drive away. I'll take you to be my wife in righteousness, doing right things. Your life will be changed to be with him. That you yourself will be driven to be doing right things in your union with Christ. In justice, putting things right. In love, this covenant committed relational marriage love. In compassion, well, that's his very nature, and it'll be your nature increasingly. I'll take you to be my wife in faithfulness. He will keep you. He won't let you go. And you will know the Lord. You will know the Lord in beautiful, spiritual, joyous union with him. That's what he's calling you to. And he's ready to forgive you your sin so that you're freed from hell's destruction, because that's where your sin is leading. And he's calling you to feel the full depth of his love. Freed from his wrath, because that is then poured on Christ instead of you. And he adds you to his church, to his people, to his bride, his cherished beloved. And he will love you forever and never let you go. That's what he's calling you to. Occasionally, people wonder what's to stop Christians sinning if they're forgiven. Does sin even matter if everything's just forgiven? But a Christian is somebody who has union with Christ. You're united to him. You're credited with righteousness, certainly, but you're also sanctified and increasingly conformed to his likeness. God changes your heart, and Christ himself is your desire. Verses 21 to 23 then emphasize the kind of full restoration for everybody who will come. And that's what God calls you to, not just preservation from hell, but entry into this most precious, intimate love with him. Is it easy for him? Well, start at chapter 3. Count love's cost. Because as you come into chapter 3, you come to a verse that really reveals God's heart for you. Let me read chapter 3, verse 1. Then the Lord said to me, go again, show love to a woman who is loved by another man and is an adulteress, just as the Lord loves the Israelites, though they turn to other gods and love raisin cakes. It's astonishing. The word show there isn't helpful. The text literally says, go again, love a woman who is loved by another man. Hosea is to go to Gomer, his wife, again. Even though she's gone off with other fellas, go back to her again and love her. God's not calling Hosea to kind of grudgingly take her back, stick her in the back room. He's not called to tolerate her presence. Go and love her. Go back to the honeymoon days. Your idolatry is cheap. Your idolatry is offensive. You're going after raisin cakes. You go, what raisin cakes? Well, you hope that your holiday or your new car or your job or whatever it is are going to bring some kind of peace or joy or security. The kind of things that God can give. And as we saw, sometimes those feel like snacks along the way, where Jesus is the bread of life who gives you eternal food. And you might have been a Christian for a long time, but you keep on slipping into sin. You keep on backsliding. Well, every day, he is ready to go and love again. So he's telling Hosea to do something that God does every day to you. He goes and he loves you again. All your offensive sin and rebellion, he still loves you. And he still keeps coming to you. Isn't that easy? Was it easy for Hosea? Well, verse 2. So I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and 5 bushels of barley. He had to buy his bride back because she'd gone off with somebody else. He had to redeem her and pay a price to get her back. It cost God the life of his son to buy you back. How much does he love you? He's unchanging in his justice, and for him to forgive you, he had to absorb the cost of your offense, and the cost of your offense is your own death. So he died for you. That is the love of the husband Jesus for his church. He died for you. Does it cost God anything to save you? Yes. Does it cost you anything to come? No. So I said to her, verse 3, you are to live with me many days. You must not be promiscuous or belong to any man, and I will act the same way toward you. For the Israelites must live many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or sacred pillar, and without ephod or household idols. Afterward, the people of Israel will return and seek the Lord their God and David their king. They will come with awe to the Lord and to his goodness in the last days. Hosea and his wife were going to enter a period of chastity and faithfulness to one another. And that was to reflect a kind of barren time, really, for Israel as a nation. But that time would be over in the last days. In the last days, they would seek the Lord, their God, and David, their king. Well, the Lord, their God, and David, their king, is met in a person that is Jesus. Revelation, almost the last words that Jesus says in the Bible. Revelation 22, well, Jesus' last words to his church. I am the root and descendant of David, the bright morning star. He is the one who is God and the King. So hope and life and love are in Christ, and they're in Christ forever. He's the perfect husband who came to love you. And Hosea's broken family has displayed for us how broken your own relationship with God is. And all the love and hurt and betrayal and unfaithfulness in that family reflect the complex nature of your own sin and what you have done against God, and his wrath towards you, and his hurt at your sin, and his love. And though you've been drawn aside from him and you've messed up with over and over, he's drawn you here. He draws you so that he can woo you with his word as you sing praises and delight in him. His love for you surpasses any human love that you can know. And he calls you to know him. Your prayer life is to be relational, not transactional, but actually spending time with him in his presence. And when you stumble, which you will, you can know that Christ has fully redeemed you. He's paid the full price, nothing else to pay. His love for you hasn't wavered, and he will go again and love you again, over and over and over. And he loves with a love without limit for days without end.